Good morning, everybody. We will get started shortly. Good afternoon, everyone. We're just giving everybody a minute to get all signed in, and we will begin in about 1 minute. Hey, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. My name is Samantha Hoylett, and I am the Program Coordinator for Environment at AASHTO. Today's webinar is hosted by the Center for Environmental Excellence under the Environmental Justice Community of Practice task. Today's webinar is on meaningful community engagement. Today, we'll hear from a number of subject matter experts and open it up for a peer exchange discussion at the end. Today, I'll go over the agenda, provide some quick housekeeping, and review lessons learned from the Developing the EJ Roadmap. Next, we'll hear about community engagement resources from Jody McCullough, who is the Federal Highway Administration Office of Planning. Then we'll hear about public involvement strategies from Amy Luft, who is the Communication Coordinator at Compass. After that, we'll hear about an EJ Outreach case study in Cleveland from Erica Schneider and Veronica Tricazzi from Ohio DOT. Lastly, Irene Kawanbe will be presenting on a Native Hawaiian self-governance project. Irene works with the National Conference of State Legislatures, NCSL, and you may recognize NCSL as one of our partners with the EJ task. As for the quick housekeeping, all attendees are on mute. We'll be saving all questions until the end. And if you would like to make a comment or ask a question, please enter your thoughts into the question pane or raise your hand so I can know to unmute you. The raise hand option should be a small hand icon in the attendee panel. This webinar is being recorded and will become available on the center website within a week. So let's kick it off with a poll question, just to get an idea of who's in the room. Please answer what your affiliation is. Okay, I will be closing the poll. So it looks like we have half of the people in the room are state DOTs. We've got 16% MPO, RPO, TPOs, 9% consultants and academics, and 14% others. We have a great mix in the room. This is like the great mix of people that we had attend at the EJ Peer Exchange in February 2016. The Peer Exchange in 2016, as well as a well-attended webinar, helped inform some of our considerations on the EJ roadmap. The roadmap included 8 focus areas, one of which included community engagement. Practitioners noted that it was important to have a proactive approach, meeting people where they are, also to have early and ongoing involvement, and also to recognize the value of tribal and other community liaisons. There were other items as well, but part of the roadmap was to help identify some specific ways to start. For example, this diagram from the handbook lists some concrete examples. Items from this list include hosting open houses or one-on-one gatherings, consistent standardized communication, opening a satellite office in the community on large projects, improving access to interpreters and translators. Sorry for the delay on this slide. So I bring up these examples to help get your thoughts going on what training tools or resources you could use to improve your engagement. And to kick this off, we have Jody McCullough from FHWA to walk us through some public involvement resources that are available. Jody? Jody, are you able to begin? We'll give Jody a moment. Okay, so it looks like we're having some difficulty getting Jody on the line. So we will move to our next presentation, and we will come back to Jody. Our next presentation is going to be from Amy Left. Amy works with Compass, which is the Community Planning Association of Southwest Idaho. To kick off her presentation, we have a poll question. The poll question is, using your best guess, what percentage of your constituents know they have a voice in transportation issues? Okay, I'll be closing the poll. Okay, so it looks like the poll says that 24% of attendees think that less than 10% of their constituents know that they have a voice in transportation issues. 34% of our attendees think that 10 to 30% know. Around the same split, 31% think that 30 to 60% know. And then it dramatically drops off from 8% and then to 4%. So Amy, please take it from here and let us know how this links into your presentation.
Okay, thank you, Sam. Well, good morning or good afternoon to those of you on the East Coast. My name is Amy Left. I am the communication coordinator for the Community Planning Association of Southwest Idaho, or COMPAS. Just to give you a quick overview of where we are, we're one of 5 MPOs in the state of Idaho, and we serve a 2-county area in southwest Idaho, which includes Boise, the state capital, and the 2 counties are the 2 most populated counties in Idaho. So while we are a rural state, we have a significant portion of Idaho's population in our planning area. Next slide, please. So I'm going to start off by asking you all to kind of ponder for yourselves just a second and think about your own life. You're busy. Think of how much time you would spend providing comments on something, whatever it may be, if you weren't sure exactly where those comments were going, or if you weren't sure that the agency or whoever it was accepting comments was even somebody who had a say in whatever it was they were asking for your feedback on. Or think about, would you click on a link if you didn't know where it was going, especially in this day and age of spam and malware. And then think beyond that. Think about, that was you. You, we just saw from our poll, either work for the government in some way, shape, or form, or work closely with the government. So you have a pretty good idea of how the process works and what governments do and how we do request and look for feedback. Now think about if you weren't familiar with that process, or if you were concerned maybe about getting deported if you gave information to the government, or if you just weren't even sure if people were supposed to be providing their input. After all, someone else is the expert. Do they really want to hear from just a citizen? So we are grappling with some of these issues when we were looking at our public participation. Next slide, please. And in 2015, we did a random household survey to really get kind of a better idea of what some of those problems were, what people knew, what they didn't know. And just a few quick things that we learned. One was that 48% of our population in our 2-county area knew that someone did some kind of regional transportation planning. 26% of the people recognized our name when provided to them. 10% knew they had some kind of representation on our board. And going back to our poll question, 37% were broadly aware that they could be involved in transportation planning in some way, shape, or form. So we knew we had a bit of a problem. Next slide, please. And what we really were realizing is that by the time we were asking for people's feedback or their input into public involvement, we really kind of had an uphill battle. If they didn't already know who we were, didn't know what we were doing, didn't know why we were asking them, it was really almost kind of too late to be asking that question when we got to the point of soliciting public involvement. We really needed to lay that groundwork ahead of time so that when we did go out and were asking them to be involved with us, they were aware we existed, they were aware what our role was and how their feedback and involvement would be used to give them a bit more comfort and understanding of what that process was. Next slide, please. And so in looking at that, we were really looking at what can we do to really provide this foundation well before we're soliciting public involvement. Really, how can we be proactive in that? And really looked at how can we use our entire communication program and really our entire planning program to help lay that foundation so that when it does come time that we're asking people to provide their input, provide their opinions, share their needs, that we've laid that groundwork and that people are comfortable with that and at a minimum recognize who we are and that we do have a legitimate role in that. Next slide, please. And so really what this came down to is really looking at how we can do this all the time in all of our efforts, whether it's our communication efforts, our planning efforts, routine communication, and that it's not just the role of our public involvement staff or our communication staff, but it's really something that all of our staff are involved with, our planners, our GIS technical staff, our directors, and everyone is sharing in that role. Next slide, please. So with that, we were kind of looking at two things. One, we were looking at marketing, which sounds odd for a government agency, but we decided really that's something that we needed to do, especially for an MPO, and I know most of the people on this call are with DOTs, and in that case you have a little bit less of a heavy lift than MPOs do. And, you know, most people are aware that there's some sort of a DOT in their state. Significantly fewer people are aware of MPOs and what our role is. And so part of it was just letting people know we're out there, who we are, what we do, that they are represented at the MPO level on our board of directors by their mayors or city council members, and really just kind of getting that out there that they have heard of us. So when we are looking for public feedback, at least it's not some agency they have never even heard of before. And next slide. And then the next piece on that is really looking at how can we educate people about what we do, and even more important than that, how they can be involved in what we do. We do a lot of different things at Compass, as all of you do, and we are a source of demographics and data. We do planning, and one of the things we do, as all of you do, is we collect public feedback. We solicit the public to be involved in our plans. And one thing that we have learned, specifically from an environmental justice standpoint, is in many parts of the world, just simply the idea of the government asking for someone's input is completely foreign. We were doing a focus group a few years ago with a group of refugees and discovered our biggest lift at that focus group was simply getting across the idea that we really did want to hear from them. What we kept hearing back from them is, well, you're the experts, we're just normal people, why are you coming to us? You know, kind of what's wrong with you? Don't you know the answers? You're supposed to know the answers. And so that was an interesting message that we were getting from them, and really made a difference on really how they wanted to be involved when they weren't seeing it as a role for themselves at all. So we're looking at not just more involvement, but better involvement. Next slide. And so we've gone about doing this in a couple of different ways, one of which is we are working to improve the consistency of our messaging, making sure when our staff are talking to people that they're hearing, the public is hearing the same thing from everyone that they work with, regardless of what the person is, who the person is, what the context is. So if someone is at a presentation and they hear someone from Compass speaking, they're getting the same general message as they are if they see a poster that maybe we have up, or maybe they see something about us in the news. And so really working with our staff, especially those that are not traditional communication staff, on what those messages are, and then training our staff on that to help the people make the connection of who we are and what we do. As I mentioned, we've been training our staff before any presentations. Our staff actually has to undergo do a dry run internally with communication and other staff to make sure that we are consistently providing the same message. And again, that goes to that constant messaging, and that means that that's everyone. It's not just our communication staff. It's not just when we're doing something as quote-unquote communication, but it's really people getting the message wherever they are. For instance, someone may hear something about us in an actual presentation, but we are out kind of more of a traditional communication mechanism. Someone else might see something from their child's school that maybe talks about data that we have that shows where people can walk and bike to school. Someone else might simply hear data that we provided quoted in a news story that maybe has nothing to do with Compass or with transportation, but they're using some of our demographic data or others. And so it's really a way of making sure that we are permeating all those different ways that we can connect with people, not just through our communication program, but through all of our programs. And then finally really is focusing on our audience. What do they care about? Who do they trust? How do they want to get their information? One thing that we learned in this survey that we did in 2015 is when looking at traditional media, television news was by far the #1 way people wanted to hear information about transportation and transportation planning, yet it was the media where we were had the least permeability. And so that's something that we've been working on, is really how do people want to get their information and how can we do a better job of reaching them that way and out where people are, getting to them where they want to hear that information and where they're receptive to it. Next slide. Generally what we've been talking about is kind of our role in the region, letting people know that they do have representation on our board, what services and expertise we can provide, because we also do things that can be provided to truly the general public. For instance, we provide mapping services. And so just letting people know that we have that role as well, and they can contact us for that. And then most importantly, what their role is, what's in it for them, that people do have the opportunity to provide their input, to be engaged, to have a say on issues that are going to affect them. And we try to get that message out constantly, not just when we are soliciting feedback, but so by the time we are at a point where we're soliciting feedback on something, or we want to invite people to an open house or to attend a focus group, that they are already aware that their input is welcome and is encouraged. Next slide. And so really then we're looking at how is this different from just regular communication. In many ways it sounds just like a good communication program. But really how this is different is that keeping in mind and focusing on how will this help improve the way people participate with us, especially those that tend to not participate, are typically underrepresented populations, and really having that as the underlying factor in everything that we do. Next slide. And so then the question becomes, is this working? And honestly, I can't tell you. I don't have an answer for that yet. Eventually, we would like to repeat the survey that we conducted in 2015 and see if we have moved the needle. Right now, it's only been 2 years. It's really too soon to see if we have made any changes. So we are doing kind of an internal review, tracking our outputs, things that we have produced, our outcomes, participation, attendees, that type of thing, and feedback that we are getting from people. But hopefully, eventually, we will be able to repeat that survey and really be able to see if we have moved the needle and if people are more aware that we exist, more aware of their opportunities to be involved at any time, not just during our public involvement processes or during times when we're having open houses or inviting that feedback. Next slide. And so then it begs the question of what you can do in your own agencies. And the first is really just learn what you can. We were lucky enough that we were able to do this survey in 2015, but that's not a necessary item. It's really using whatever data are available to you, whether it's hard data, whether it's anecdotal data of who are your constituents, what do they care about, where are they getting their information, where they want to get their information. And then learning that and then applying it to your programs, making sure you're where they are so that they are seeing you as part of the culture and the fabric of wherever it is that they are and whatever it is that they are doing. And then along those lines is doing it everywhere and doing it with everyone. Again, it's not just part of our communication program, it's not just our communication staff, but it's really making sure that all of our staff are contributing to that, so that ultimately when we are seeking public input and public involvement, we've laid that groundwork and people are ready for it. And then finally, measure our success and improve. Again, whether you have the ability to measure your success with hard data, or whether it's looking at comments you receive, a number of people that attend an event, or number of people that provide comments. There's always a lot that can be gleaned and then work toward improving and seeing what can be changed next time. Next slide. And with that, I thank you all for listening this morning, and I believe we'll be taking questions for everyone at the end. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Amy. So I am going to go back to Jody McCullough's presentation from Federal Highways.
Thank you. Sorry about that. We we had a little bit of technical difficulties earlier. So thank you. My name is Jody McCullough, and I'm a community planner with Federal Highway Administration. I'm with the Office of Planning in headquarters in Washington, D.C. And so I'm going to provide you a little bit of an update on some of the Federal Highway public involvement products that we have available and that we are currently either developing or updating. Next slide, please. The first thing that I'd like to draw to your attention is both Federal Highway and Federal Transit Administration work together to create this guide to answer questions that the public might have about the transportation project development process. It's a smaller book, maybe a half sheet size of, so it's a little convenient, small document that we are hoping to print soon because we haven't printed it, but we've ran out of the current printing. And so what it's designed to do is really about the transportation project development process. And so for somebody who wants to get involved and they want to find out how that process works and where they should get involved, this decision-making guide would help them, identify, should they wait until the project's going through the environmental review process, or what's planning and things like that. So we're hoping that this answers some of those questions. Next slide, please. The next item that I'd like to draw your attention to is we call this the briefing book. This book was, this is our most popular document. This was designed for MPO staff and elected officials, and but we find that this is reaching a lot of others as well. This book is it's also a short publication, but it gets to the point about not just the project development process and planning, but it talks about all the other things that you're balancing during the transportation project development process, and explains things like air quality and environmental justice and land use, and so that they understand that when a transportation decision maker is making a decision, that they're looking at a number of things, and it's not just that the balance between people and goods movement and how really those really complement each other, and so this is, as I said, one of our most popular documents. Next slide, please. The next item is the public involvement techniques for transportation decision making, and this is been around for a long time. We've had a couple of updates, and we're currently trying to do a real minor update to this. We did the most recent one in 2015, and this one, this techniques guide was the companion guide to our National Highway Institute, National Transit Institute Public Involvement Training course as a backup and supporting more in-depth detail about the different ways of doing public involvement, and it's organized in three sections. The first section talks about engaging people, so it's about identifying who the public is and who are the traditionally underserved, and how the different ways of finding out about people and the values, interests, and needs. Method of not just going out and speaking at people, but speaking to people and finding out who they are. The second section of this document is techniques for involving the public. So this is just a usual, has a list of different venues and approaches, and some of the benefits and maybe obstacles, and it gives some information about how that can be a benefit for somebody who's maybe new to public involvement but looking for some innovative ways to reach out to the public in general, and including the traditionally underserved, which the document talks about may need additional effort beyond the traditional public involvement process, and that is an important activity. And then the third section is generating feedback and understanding the type of information that you want to give to the public, and the information that you want to get back to them, and the level of engagement. How involved and engaged do you need to be to make sure that the messaging and the interactivity is appropriate for the situation. Next slide, please. Our next document is the how to engage low literacy and limited English proficiency. And this also has been around for a while. It's Federal Highways policy to provide meaningful access to transportation decision-making to all affected and interested people. And this is response to the Executive Order 13166. So this document has some case study best practices for identifying engaging low literacy and also limited English proficiency populations in transportation decision-making. And this was, information was collected through telephone interviews with individuals across 30 states. So this has some, this provides some techniques and can, that can apply to different situations, and is also the low literate populations in addition to limited English. So that's, it addresses both of those things. The next item, next slide please, that we are working on is we are in the process of updating the National Highway Institute, National Transit Institute course for public involvement in transportation decision making. This course also has been around for a long time, and what we've Federal Highways and Federal Transit have made a decision that while we're doing the update, this is going to be converted to a web-based course, so it will be available online to provide information to a broader audience. Generally, this is available to practitioners and the public, and they would be able to access that information on the National Highway Institute website. So that should be coming early in the spring of 2018, and we also would we are anticipating accompanying the web-based training with a one-day technical assistance type training that would be, the goal would be to provide an opportunity for practitioners to practice some of what they've learned during the web-based training. The next item that we are going to, that we're currently in the process of updating, next slide please, is the public involvement reference tool. And this has been on our website for a few years. We've scanned all of the state DOT websites, and we provide links to, you can see the documents listed on the slide, and we have links to the Limited English Proficiency Plan, the Title VI Plan, if there's an EJ policy, the Native American Tribal Consultation, the state DOT homepage, and also social media. So it provides, what we're doing right now, we've pulled it down because we're updating the links. It shouldn't change much, but people have found this, practitioners have found it very useful because you can, for example, if you're looking at limited English proficiency and you want to see what someone else is doing, you can scan this and look at other states and see what they're doing too, that you might be interested in, and then you can contact them, or you see if that's appropriate for your situation. And then next slide, please. The next item that we are currently is under development the name of the project is Techniques for Improved Engagement and Public Participation, and this is going to be a video series of case studies. We'll also have the case studies in printed material, but we'll be developing short videos that will focus on both the use of a technology tool or a technique for public involvement that has been identified as being really effective. We understand that public involvement is changing, that there's obviously the traditional way of reaching out to the traditionally underserved communities is through meetings or one-on-one contact with them, but studies have shown that they're also using technology in large numbers, and that this is another way of reaching the public and the traditionally underserved, because by providing a number of different ways of reaching out, you can have a greater chance of getting the message out. So we're going to identify states and NPOs and transit agencies and find out what they're doing and how it's working, and let them share that information with others. So, and next slide, please. And also what we're doing is we've got public involvement case studies and notable practices. And so we've got, this was updated a few years ago. It probably needs to be updated again, but because things are changing so rapidly, and the video case studies will add to this. But we've got some case studies on traditional practices, and then we also did we reached out to folks a couple of years ago about some unusual practices. So we have those included as well, with people that did different things that were a little bit unique, with like similar to having a troll going to the public involvement, and they do little news clips on where the troll went to a transportation event. And it's so they they got a little bit of a following, more so than they would if it was just a dry announcement, to make it more fun, and partnering with the University of Kansas for an airstream trailer that they could bring out to people so that they could reach out to those communities that may be hard to reach. And next slide, please. And last of all, I'd like to talk, just let you know about PlanWorks. This is a tool that we have online, and it's a web resource that transportation practitioners are using during various stages of the transportation project development process. And this is about collaboration. There's some public involvement in here, but it's really, so this could be useful for the public involvement community to identify those points in the process. It's really important to get the public and the traditionally underserved communities involved. And so that's what PlanWorks is designed to do. And so next slide, please. So we've got a slide with some web links that you can go to find information, and each of the slides includes a link that will take you to that specific document. And my contact information is on the next slide. And so please feel free to contact me or any of the others on the slide if you have any additional information or suggestions for things that we maybe want to post on our website, or if you'd like to discuss this further. Thank you.
Thank you, Jody, for sharing those great resources. If you just bear with me, I'm going to change to the next presentation. So our next presentation is from Erica Schneider and Veronica Tricazzi on their case study with the Cleveland Opportunity Corridor Project. And to kick off their presentation, we will be doing another poll question. So the question is, have you ever had a project that resulted in a disproportionately high and adverse effects to an EJ population? Okay, I will be closing the polls. This is a really interesting split. It seems like 29% said yes, 38% said no, and 33% said unsure. So it's quite an even split here. But it'll be interesting to hear from Erica and Veronica about their experience. So I will start their presentation.
Thanks, Pam. This is Erica Schneider. I'm with Ohio Department of Transportation, and I'm an assistant administrator in our Office of Environmental Services. And I'll be presenting the first part of the presentation, and then Veronica Tricazzi, who is our underserved population subject matter expert, will be presenting the second part. So our case study that we're going to talk about today is called the Cleveland Opportunity Corridor Project, and it is located in the city of Cleveland. And it involves construction of a 3.5-mile urban boulevard through an underserved area of Cleveland. Next slide, please. And this is the general area. You can see it's in the southwest part of Cleveland. And on the right, you can see in the southwest part of that oval, it's at the end of I-490, just kind of ends right there. And then up in the northeastern part is an area called University Circle, which is an area, there's universities there and hospitals, and it's a big draw for people who visit. And in the middle, between all those two places, was the study area for our project, and it was a historically underserved area in Cleveland. Next slide, please. And this is just an aerial view looking from the southwest to the northeast of that area. You can see it's there's a lot of industrial area and railroad corridor and residential housing. Okay, next slide. So this area had experienced a steady level of decline for several decades. Businesses closed and relocated. A lot of the employment opportunities disappeared. Population decreased as people had to move out because there were no jobs. What had once been a very strong and cohesive community had turned into isolated residences, neglected properties, and lots of incompatible land use as more and more parcels became vacant. So the City of Cleveland worked with ODOT and FHWA, and we identified that this project was a way to help achieve the City of Cleveland's redevelopment and revitalization goals, and that would help improve quality of life for the communities and the residents in that area. Next slide, please. And these are just some real quick streetscapes of what the area looks like. You can see there's a lot of vacant lots. The sidewalks aren't in good shape. The roads aren't in good shape. Down in the right-hand corner is a picture of the recreational building that we'll be talking about in a little bit. But you can see that the community just needed a lot of upkeep. Next slide, please. So the purpose of the project was to improve the roadway network in this historically underserved and economically depressed area. And some of the needs for the project included improving the system linkage. You could see in that slide with the map that there really wasn't a good way to get from the southwestern part of the project area to the northeastern part. Improving mobility and supporting the City of Cleveland's planned economic development in that area. And we also identified some goals such as improving public transportation connections and improving facilities for pedestrians and cyclists. So the project, I'm sorry, next slide please. So the project came about in an effort to shift traffic from Cleveland's Interbelt Bridge. This was a project that was identified as a way to do that. And we looked at many alternatives in how to connect these two areas. And two main concepts came about, which were improving the existing streets in the area, and the other was constructing a new roadway. Next slide, please. So the preferred alternative was to construct this new urban boulevard that would connect the southwestern part of the project area with the University Circle. So this would be, like I said, an urban boulevard. It's not a new highway, but it would be more accessible. Next slide, please. And this is just one of the cross sections of what this boulevard would look like. In some areas there's a grassy median in the middle, but you can see it was meant to be more pedestrian friendly. There would be street trees, a lot of lighting, bike ped facilities on both sides. Next slide, please. So as we got into the environmental studies for this project, we were looking at environmental justice. And based on the 2010 census data, we found that most of the project area exhibited a very high percentage of low-income residents, ranging from 26.5% near the northern end of the project area, which is that University Circle area, which tends to be a little more affluent, to 65% in other parts of the project area. Also based on the 2010 census data, the majority of the project area exhibit a high percentage of minority populations, ranging from 47.2% near the northern end of the project area to nearly 100% in the rest of the project area. Furthermore, about 40% of the occupied housing units in the study area were zero automobile households, which really highlights the reliance that people had on transit and bike ped facilities. Next slide, please. So this map just kind of shows the circles are 10-minute walking distance from transit stations, and you can just see how the need, there were several transit stations in the area, and the need to maintain that and even improve people's access to transit. Next slide, please. So based on our look at the EJ populations in the study area, we determined that any project would mostly affect low-income and minority populations just by the nature of where it was. And we made efforts to avoid and minimize impacts to residences, businesses, and community facilities. However, due to the characteristics, there was no feasible alternative that would address both the identified transportation needs and avoid impacts to low-income and minority populations. So despite its expected benefits, which I'll talk about in just a minute, low-income and minority populations would be affected more than other populations by the project, and therefore the project was found to have a disproportionately high and adverse effect on environmental justice populations. Next slide, please. So our EJ analysis determined there would be a negative impact to the displacement of existing homes, businesses, and one church. We had several residential relocations, commercial relocations, and again, one church building. We also expected traffic noise to be a negative effect on the population since we were building a brand new road through an area that didn't have one before. Next slide, please. So we did expect some benefits for both low-income and minority populations from the project. Improved access to the interstate system, and a major employment center, again, University Circle. There's a lot of hotels and museums and the university and hospitals in that area, which would provide jobs, and increasing people's access to those would be a benefit. We'd be increasing mobility and local access for all transportation system users, increasing pedestrian and bicycle access. As you saw in the photos before, that was not very good in that area, and connectivity and safety for both pedestrians and bicycle users. We'd also increase the potential for employment opportunities because the City of Cleveland and their revitalization strategy, they planned complementary development in that area that would provide jobs, and potential for enhanced community cohesion through complementary infill that was part of the City of Cleveland's plan. Next slide, please. We also expected benefits from improved visual environment. Like you saw in the cross section of the boulevard, there would be better lighting, street lighting, and lighting for the bike ped facilities. We'd be planting grass and tree lawns. There was a landscape median in a lot of the boulevard with stormwater treatment. We were going to put aesthetic treatments on the retaining walls and bridges, and we'd be improving safety for bicycle and pedestrians especially at street crossings. It would improve congestion, which would again improve safety for people. However, despite all of these anticipated benefits, the project would still disproportionately adversely affect low-income and minority populations. So this is leading into Veronica's discussion of how we employed public engagement techniques to make sure that we were addressing people's concerns and mitigating those adverse effects.
Next slide, please. Thank you, Erica. So as she discussed, we really wanted to involve the public since this was going to affect them. So ODOT and the City of Cleveland used a context-sensitive solution approach to proactively engage the public. We had a lot of stakeholder meetings, and we utilized those stakeholders to engage the low-income and minority populations in the project area. And we also ensured that the environmental document was written in a reader-friendly format so that the public could easily understand what it was we were talking about. Next slide, please. So this graphic gives you an idea. There's 5 different neighborhoods out here within the project area, and we utilized those stakeholders who identified residents of the area. They assigned those certain residents to each neighborhood to help us disseminate the information and really gain good feedback from the public. And the City of Cleveland did a lot of this work and chose a lot of those individuals. And they were very instrumental in keeping us and the public informed. Next slide, please. So some of the outreach methods that we used were posting flyers at churches, community centers, and recreational centers, written and verbal surveys, questionnaires, mapping and design exercises, having a lot of one-on-one meetings, but we also did some email blasts and direct mailings. We had a project website and did a lot of newspaper advertisements. And the project team also interviewed residents and workers to understand the role that the local businesses played in each neighborhood. Next slide, please. So the study team actively monitored the PI that we were doing, and we made changes if it was necessary to make sure the communities were being kept up to date. For example, we increased the font size on some of the mailings to improve the readability. We had reader-friendly newsletters. We tried to not talk in a lot of technical jargon. And we also utilized the U.S. Postal Service data to reach more people, including both the property owners and tenants, and also made stamps available at the public meetings so that if they chose to make a comment, they could send it to us when they were ready and didn't have to worry about finding the money to buy a stamp. Next slide, please. So when it comes to the public meeting themselves, we held a lot of them mostly during the day to reduce the safety concerns that the public had. However, because we wanted to meet and address all the concerns for the rest of the public, we also had more meetings in the evening. We also held the meetings in neutral locations within each neighborhood and also kept those sites close to the residents so that they didn't have to travel very far for the meetings. Next slide, please. So the City of Cleveland also held business coordination meetings to provide an opportunity for the local businesses to learn about the project. This was a great opportunity for us to hear the businesses' concerns and incorporate any requests that they had, if possible, into the design of the project. As I mentioned before, there were neighborhood coordination meetings that were held in each of the neighborhoods, and these meetings really allowed us to give us an opportunity to develop a better understanding of the community's needs. Next slide, please. So as far as graphics go, this is just an example of one of the presentation boards that we had at the public meetings. The public could rank what they felt was a priority for the project. For example, this one is it shows roadside elements that could have been included into the project. For example, they have wayfinding signage, enhanced sidewalks, dedicated bike lanes, and multi-use paths. So we tried to allow them to rank what they felt was most important for them in their everyday life. Next slide, please. So for the mitigation measures, as a result of our environmental justice impact analysis and the public input, we committed to the following measures to mitigate the adverse impacts. We're going to construct 2 pedestrian and bike bridges, one near the southern end of the project and one about in the middle. And we're also contributing $500,000 towards the planned expansion of the recreation center that Erica showed a picture of earlier, which was a very important facility to the community. Next slide, please. And this is a cross-section of what that bridge was going to look like going over part of the roadway. So we have dedicated biking and pedestrian facilities up top. Next slide, please. So we were also going to construct noise walls in the locations that met the criteria if they were so desired by the public. We are also creating a new entrance into the St. Hyacinth neighborhood that the community felt was very important. And we're also enhancing the bus shelters in the area where the existing bus lines will cross the new boulevard. In one of those pictures earlier, you could tell that they had very, very enhanced bus shelters by just the pole with a sign on it saying that this was a bus stop. So we really wanted to make sure that we enhance those because transit is such a big deal in that area. Next slide, please. So we are also going to provide enhanced aesthetics into the overall design, and including increased lighting for safety and appropriate use of landscaping and the park benches. And we wanted to be smart about the landscaping so that, you know, criminals can't be hiding behind bushes and, you know, and have a crime rate increase. And we were also going to provide a minimum of $500,000 for on-the-job training that will target the training opportunities for the individuals in the immediate vicinity of the project. Next slide, please. So because this boulevard was going through the neighborhood, we did have to relocate a lot of people. We had a voluntary residential relocation program, so some of those residents whose homes weren't directly impacted were going to be eligible for the relocation assistance as well. And the voluntary and the required relocations, we tried to find the replacement housing that had similar access to the public transit system and tried to relocate them within the same neighborhood if they so desired. Next slide, please. So the outcomes of the project, we had very positive reviews throughout the whole NEPA process by the community, which we were very happy about. ODOT continues to work with the City of Cleveland and the communities, and it is important to note one section of this is completed and one is currently under construction, and the final section will move into construction in 2018. And with that, I believe we are finished. If you guys have any questions at all, please feel free to contact us at email or phone. And thank you, Sam, for allowing us to participate.
Thank you both so much for presenting. And if you have immediate questions, please do put them in the question box. We will be addressing those questions at the end. So thank you again. And lastly, we have Irene Kawanabe from NCSL, who will be presenting on a Native Hawaiian self-governance project. So first, we will have a poll question. So the question is, have you ever gone through a local leader for your community engagement meetings? Okay, I'll be closing the poll shortly. So it looks like 71% of attendees say yes, they have gone through a local leader, 16% say no, and 13% say unsure. So today we'll hear from Irene about her experience in Hawaii.
Great, thank you, Sam. Yes, I'm Irene Kawanabe. I'm with the National Conference of State Legislatures and our State Tribal Institute. Briefly, just a little bit about our project. We were asked by the Hawaii legislative leadership to research and create a report on the impact to the Native Hawaiian community of an anticipated federal piece of legislation. In the state of Hawaii, Native Hawaiians have the lowest income and are typically disenfranchised from the political process. So as part of our project, we held approximately 25 meetings throughout the state of Hawaii with members of the community. Participants were both Native Hawaiians and non-Native Hawaiians. We focused on 6 policy areas to learn about the different priorities within each community. As we began our project, we tried to address what is meaningful, and we knew from all our resource gathering that we were walking into a pretty charged and complex situation. And one of the reasons is similar types of meetings had been held throughout the state. And so we wanted to make sure that our meetings didn't leave some of the same impacts that we had heard about. So one strategy is that we met with a number of people and groups who were similarly positioned as us beforehand to learn as much as we could about general and specific challenges, the history of the issue, concerns that we would typically hear, and acronyms that were related, any tips that they could share, and people were very willing to share, so that was very helpful. We did develop outreach strategy and tools. We wound up contracting with a local nonprofit as well as engaging with local legislators to be the gatekeeper and the nexus to the community. They also served as our main convener at the meetings, and they would kick off and give some of the scope of the meetings. We did spend a lot of time in the community. I don't know if we built as many relationships with actual community members except for when we saw them, but I think it was very important when they would ask us where we were staying, what type of restaurants we were going to, that we could talk about some of the, that we actually were spending time in the community. We did rely on the local nonprofit to address the preferred modes of communication and then the appropriate meeting space. I think those pretty much went hand in hand. Oftentimes we were meeting at rec centers, school cafeterias, sometimes outdoor spaces. So we weren't able to use PowerPoint. We wound up using a lot of easel pads to try to do that. And the local nonprofit helped us reserve the space, send out some of the invites, and collect RSVPs just so we could keep track of how many people would we be expecting and the number of snacks. And we made a few mistakes with the snacks. We learned along the way what type of snacks were better and refreshments. So we had to be very specific with what we asked. And then we collaborated with other groups when possible to hold some of these convenings. Next slide, please. I think for us, we did as much as we could beforehand at the meeting, and then we had to be very flexible while we were at the meetings. So, of course, the first one would be studying the community and the history, so we would know some of the issues that would be percolating up and how to frame the questions. The appropriate materials, again, the space really drove much of what we were able to provide as far as meeting materials and information, like we couldn't use PowerPoints. And then we had to know exactly what our goals were at the meetings, what type of questions we wanted to ask. At the meetings itself, we had to do a lot of course, facilitating, listening, writing what people were responding on the easel pads, repeating back. We had to be very cognizant of the role of elders and certain strong personalities in the room. So some of the timing, the meetings went on some longer, some shorter than we wanted. but we had to be very flexible with that. One of the big challenges is a number of groups had come in and had similar types of meetings with local community members, and so a lot of community members felt that some of these meetings were just one-offs. So we had to be very clear with what type of follow-up they could expect from us, what the project outcomes could be, what type of materials we'd be sharing back with them, and then be very gracious with our thank yous. We would send out email blasts, thank yous, thank people at the meetings to do that. Okay, next slide, please. I think some of our major takeaways were after each meeting, we needed to debrief as a team because I wouldn't be privy to what some of my team members would hear at these meetings, so to make sure that we were collecting all the information and being flexible and adjusting for future meetings. We had to recognize that each community was very unique. We had a lot of strong personalities, as I mentioned, and each community had different needs and different priorities based on where they were located. Our use of local contacts and local leaders was key with helping to build the trust and openness from the community, and also they could be very helpful if we had to be very specific on asking what type of refreshments, where we should get the refreshments, things like that. They provided us helpful advice. We dressed very formally at first and had to learn how to dress appropriate to the community. And then providing follow-up with the community itself or referring their questions to other agencies or groups that could help them. Next slide, please. So this is my contact information if you have any questions about the project or if I can provide any information about what we did to engage with the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Irene, for your presentation. So that concludes our presentations for today. So we're going to move into questions and answers from the presenters. We've got several lined up in the question box, so I will start with those. The first question is for Amy Luft. The question is, how was your survey conducted? And in addition, what specifically is Compass using to measure success of the increased effort?
So this is Amy. So to start with the first question of how did we conduct the survey, we actually contracted out with a survey research firm, and they did a phone survey starting with postcards mailed to the future survey recipients, letting them know that they would be receiving a phone call, and then with those phone calls to conduct the survey questions. And they did focus on making sure we had both landlines as well as cell phones, and conducted the survey in both English and Spanish. And then to answer the second question, we hope in the future to be able to repeat the survey to really be able to see if we have moved the needle by following up with the same questions and seeing if our answers have changed. Since it's only been 2 years, it's a little premature for us to do that now. We don't anticipate we would have seen changes in that short period of time. So in the meantime, we're monitoring internally, looking at outputs, outcomes, for instance, how many people are participating at events or submitting comments. However, that is kind of a soft way of measuring success, just as knowing that different planning products that we have and different things that we have going on are also greatly affect that. For instance, this update to our long-range plan is a very minor update, and so we haven't had as big of a public outreach push as we do on some of our other updates. And so knowing that some of those will impact that as well, so we need to keep that in mind and not just look at raw numbers.
Great, thank you, Amy. So the next question is for Ohio. Are you keeping track to verify whether the area is gentrifying, including whether rents and property values are going up?
Like Veronica said, the project is still in process at this point, so there hasn't been enough time to really track that. I think the city of Cleveland is going to be keeping track of that as part of the revitalization plan. So we don't have metrics on that at this point, but We will be making sure that all the commitments that we made in the environmental document will be completed. And like I said, I'm sure the City of Cleveland is tracking how well that area is going to be redeveloping over the next several years.
Great, and another question for you, Erica. Were there any opportunities to partner with the housing agencies?
That's a good question. I think that they were part of the stakeholders on the project. I'm not sure how involved they were, but I know that we were working with them in contacting residents as part of the stakeholder community.
Okay. And a question for Veronica. Do you have any feedback on the local training on the job? How's it going, and did you use design build or bid build?
I'm not sure what the build contract was exactly, but we have received positive feedback so far. But we could always reach out to the City of Cleveland and find out those answers for you if you'd like.
Great, I can put you in touch with the person who asked that question. And another question for Ohio. Are you keeping track as to whether the training opportunities to the community are being translated into real opportunities for the residents?
That's a good question, too. I'm not sure how that's being measured. I know that we have had numerous training opportunities for people to get, especially for on-the-job training for construction jobs that are part of the project, and that's gotten a lot of really good feedback. But as far as metrics go, I'm not sure that what those numbers are. And again, we can check into that.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, so that's all the questions in the question box. I want to open it up for our last few minutes. So if you would like to speak and share your own examples or your own case studies that come to mind based on the presentations that we heard today, you can raise your hand using the hand icon in the top left panel of your dashboard, and I can unmute you and we can hear from you. So, please feel free to start raising your hands. Okay, well, it sounds like everyone was satisfied with what they heard today, so that's great. And I guess I will just quickly share with you that please visit our website at environment.transportation.org for more information and resources on environmental justice, as well as a wide range of other topics designed for transportation practitioners. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me at hoilepp@ashto.org. The recording of the webinar will be made available on the center website and within the week. So thank you again, and this concludes our webinar.